see. All right. Works. All right. Cool. So, hello. Ooh, let's do this. Um, so this is going to be an art stream and an asset stream. I'm going to be basically working on some of my things like my overlays, my animations, but all of those, my model, all those things that people come into my chat and try to get me to buy. Um, so let's hope that the big text that I'm going to have over the stuff and the obviously working on a art project is actually going to get people to pay attention. With that, I'm also going to be streaming a podcast from AJ Pickett. AJ Pickett is also the mighty gluestick. When it comes to Dungeons and Dragon lore, I would say that basically he is the peer review OG. A lot of other content creators don't cite their sources, and their sources are oftentimes Wikipedia's and oftentimes wrong. AJ Pickett happens to be. AJ Pickett happens to be a game writer, so he actually actually worked in the industry. So he has the library, and he just pulls from the books and says it's like Dungeon Magazine 287 issue this, page this number. They say this, so pretty much, was just going to have the whole basically history of the early history of the Faerunian elves while I work on the various things. Switch to this. Okay, cool. Notice, update schedule, do thumbnail, work on smug animation. That is my schedule. The thing that this is a 320 by 320 PNG that I can edit in Canva. Excuse me. To basically just post on my page, because I don't know if you know this about Twitch's scheduling thing. It's complete ass. Maybe it's not complete ass if you're an actual professional streamer, but I don't really see a use for it because you can only schedule continuous streams. So if you're going to stream every Sunday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's always going to be, I don't know, Cyberpunk or Call of Duty or Counter-Strike or something, then yeah, that works. You literally cannot do a one-off thing. And they just said a while ago, they said oh yeah, soon, TM, you will be able to do one-off streams. They haven't patched that at all. Anyways, just to do.
And this is a series of videos on the elven race of the world setting of Toril, also known as the Forgotten Realms, one of the most widely known and well-established settings for the game Dungeons & Dragons. I have hundreds of other videos about D&D. Check out my channel and subscribe as I upload new videos every week. According to the collected archive of cited dates from the published game books, magazines, adventures, articles, and novels that is called the Grand History of the Forgotten Realms, the elves were originally brought to the world of Toril 28,493 years before the current year of 1493 of the Dale Reckoning calendar, usually abbreviated as DR, give or take 1,000 years or so. Those first elves, the Saitel Quasir, were very in tune with nature. Many called them the Wild Elves or the Grugak, and back then, the Green Elves. They lived in small tribes scattered around the great forests of the central northern lands of a massive supercontinent. In these days, humans and orcs were around, but they were struggling on the fringes of a world ruled by giants and dragons. The elves didn't have to adapt to a vastly different way of life. The heart of the mightiest forest the world of Toril had ever seen were formidably primal. The ancient spirits and elemental powers of the living woods were sources of incredible power that didn't take too kindly to the thundering giants and destructive dragons. The elves, on the other hand, at home in the rich magic surrounding them, cleaved close to those powers and worshipped them, just as they had worshipped the greatest powers of the Feywild. The deep forests and
Yeah, they're
Feywild
from the
at
Feywild.
times were so closely aligned that the two planes almost merged, and the song magic of the elves gave them effortless abilities to sculpt nature to suit their needs, creating living treetop communities of stunning beauty. It was not the everlasting happy ever after of the Feywild, but in their domains, it was about as close as you could get. There, the Green Elves studied the movement of the planets, the positions of the stars, the turning of the seasons, the breath and voice of the forests. They meditated, crafted traditional bows, swords, and mail armor, kept close watch on the borders, and involved themselves with their own concerns. The Northern Green Elves perhaps kept a lower profile because they were closer to the heart of the giant empire of Astoria, and they were pioneers that the Fey Lords had sent into this new world to serve and protect the great forests and the Fey power they provided. It has always been a great misconception of the scholars, particularly humans, that the Fey powers are only concerned with the Feywild. The truth is that the Fey Lords count many places on many prime material worlds as part of their domains, the deep forests of Toril included. Also among this first wave of elves was the near mystical Aril Tel Quasir, the winged elves, known as the Avariel. They were actually the very first elves sent to Toril, but they had a very different experience in their first decades, being constantly attacked by the dragons, who, we should note, wiped out the civilization of the winged creator race, the Aeri Siren, in that same area some 2,000 years before, driving the avian race from the northern lands and the Hall of...
Yeah, so a couple things. Elves are a lot more in D&D. Most of the time, they're just played as snooty humans. They're alien. They're very alien. They came from the Feywild, and if you get into the, if you can get the, you can find it, the second edition Book of Elves. They go into their psychology, and they're kind of terrifying. You would not want an elven boyfriend or girlfriend or really anything.
Causing them to flee to the distant land of Ankarome, where many think they eventually devolved into the Aarakocra race. For the dragons, Avariel were just more rare and tasty winged humanoids for them to hunt and kill, so sadly they learned to keep to the ground and lived as nomads, never flourishing within the deep forests like the Green Elves. Eventually migrating further east, it was only thousands of years later that the Avariel returned to the far north. Exploring the high peaks, they discovered a mountaintop sheared off by the Netherese empire of the humans. The area was also cleared of white dragons by the dwarves, who in those later years were widespread across Faerun. So the Avariel finally had a safe place to build a city of their own and prosper there. So remote that most other elves had no idea they even existed anymore. This is why, although they were the first to arrive and have always been on Toril.
Okay, so I've also switched. Yeah, so also one of the things is originally in Faerun they had a giant empire and a dragon empire. Yes, there was a dragon empire. It was bad. It's very bad if you were to like. You pretty much you were not like. There's a lot of species in Faerun that aren't around anymore. They were eaten. So here. But I've switched to Canva. 22. 18, 18, 20, 20, 21, 2, so 18 through 22. That's Friday, 23 and 24. 23, 24. Okay, so there's, all right, so there's that. Okay, switching back. go back to
The winged elves
here.
seldom get mentioned in the history of their people, and why.
Oh, also, I would like to point out, while I do like this guy's work for obviously because it's well sourced, he has commented that 50% of his patrons listen to his stuff to go to sleep. Which some of it was really cute because some of it, um, a larger than a larger than expected percentage of them are parents who put his streams on for their children to listen to go to sleep. So they're listening to D&D. Their children, the little wee ones, are listening to D&D before they can even count the dice. I just thought that was adorable.
One almost never encounters them away from their remote homeland. The Crystal City in the area of the Snow Eagles in distant Palvuria atop Mount Sundabar. They are mentioned in the early history of the Gold and Silver Elves, though, as one dragon which attacked them frequently was the ancient red dragon Mahatna Taurian. The second wave of elves to arrive included the Dark Elves. They mainly settled in the jungles of the south part of the supercontinent and differed from the Green Elves in that they were less inclined to live in tribal units in the forests, but rather preferred to form settlements and structures, particularly of rock, much like the Green Elves had observed the humans doing. Humans at this time seem to have been scattered and in a bit of a slump after the fall of some ancient empire of theirs, but very little is known about it in their early history, and only a few monuments stand to let us know that they ever existed in the southern lands. The dragon ruled, and all other races served them in one form or another. So it was with the Dark Elves, who managed to negotiate their way into a position where they provided magical services, managed slaves, took care of mercantile activities and other skilled tasks for the dragons, making themselves as indispensable as they could.
Dark Elves before the fall of Law did not have the inherent radiation and corruption, which they're getting away from now, thankfully. It was really great trying in second edition to play a dark elf, and literally you just started taking, like, your gear started melting when it got hit with sunlight. It was not playable. Also, the simple fact that it was a percentile chance magic resistance was also just wild. Let's see, that should work. Export. Let's see how that looks in Canva. Let's see here. So
This not only served their survival, but it also gave them enormous influence. On a peninsula surrounded by a turbulent and dangerous sea with hot winds from the desert creating a shrieking wind that inspired the name the Bay of the Banshee, the Dark Elves performed high magic and summoned dark stone from the earth to form a huge estate made from one single expanse of solid rock. This, like the rest of the city, was decorated with elaborate mosaics on walls and pavements formed from gemstones. Around the estate, many warehouse-sized buildings were arrayed, also all of solid rock, and around it all a solid black rock wall, which further protected from the sea on three sides. The central estate was the home of the city ruler, always an archmage, and the Dark Elves named...
Okay, so that's weird. I wonder if the cutouts will... Oh, well, there's only one way to find out. See here, download. Let's see. Okay, no OBS overlaid. 20 by 320, and let's see, 318 to 323. Let's see how that looks. Down folder. You kept the light. Okay. I can edit that. Open. And
the city of trade and wonders, Atornash. It thrived in the hot southern peninsula for the next 9,400 years and was already 1,600 years old before the third wave of elven people arrived. Although these ones were not invited by the Fey Lords, they arrived due to a disaster of their own making. This was the arrival of the Gold and Silver Elves on Toril, but more on that in a moment. Atilnash played a very important role in the history of the Dawn Age and the first flowering of the elven civilization which followed. It was deeply involved in the suppression of the Yuan-Ti Empire and the thousand-year conflict between the giants of Astoria and the dragons. Countless slaves were processed and shipped off from the city. There were a great number of magical experiments which created some of the strangest creatures on Toril, many of which still exist. It was a place where the magical wonders of the lost creator races were collected, studied, bought and sold. It profiteered from the conflicts and also managed to survive a vicious religious war among the dragons, which saw a fundamental split in their species into the metallic and chromatic factions. The most skilled mages created artifacts of war and wonder during the city's history. The last ruler of Atilnash was the Archmage Carnalist, a worshipper of the ancient elemental evil god Gaunador. Carnalist was alive and ruling the city when the first High Elves, the descendant of Fey Eladrin.
Okay, cool. First of all, that's actually some cool shit. Yeah, never let an elf be too uppity. They were toadies. But that looks like I got that one done really hot, quick, in a hurry. Not only that, I got a pretty good workflow for that to actually work out. Good. That can be very quick. So, oh, let's see. Properties. Done. So that'll be uploaded. Now, okay. Get early. Let's do this. Let's see here. Pull up that file. Properties. That works. And look. Move you over here. And let's see. Okay, so where is that? Designs. Files. Okay. Alright, yeah, so
The Gold and Silver Elves arrived in the northern lands of the Green Elves. As mentioned, the Gold and Silver Elves were not invited to the world of Toril. They arrived as refugees of their own cataclysmic disaster, which saw the destruction of their former home in the Feywild named Tintagear. A disaster which they were arrogant and short-sighted enough to repeat on the world of Toril later, in an event later known as the Sundering. The 50 gold elves and 1 silver elf who arrived through a portal on top of a burned hill in the north of the supercontinent of Toril were led by Prince Durothil. The name Faerun, which means the One Land, is what they called this new home. They faced immediate, terrible danger though as they were attacked by a formidable red dragon named Mahatma Torian, also known as the Master of Mountains, and were shocked when they realized elven magic was next to useless against him. There seems to have been a few centuries of activities with this gold elf population, as there is lore about Shalario Moonflower, the silver elf, aiding the winged Avarial elves and finally managing to drive Mahatnatorian south for at least a few centuries. Something of an adventurer, Shalario Moonflower managed to marry a priestess of the goddess Sayanine Moonbow of the Arvandorian Seldarine. They had many children who all followed in the worship of the goddess of the moonlight, and collectively they became known as the Moon Elves. Over the many thousands of
Okay. So that, yeah, write it down, because after the viral treatments, memory is bad. Where are you? Oh. So my thumbnail size needs to be 7. Let's see here, 2080, 720. All right, so. Yeah.
years, the Moon Elves have grown so popular.
Oh yeah. So unfortunately, we had a little bit of problem back in the day. Actually, like 2 weeks ago, we got a massive viral infestation, as did the rest of the lab. It caused systemic damage to the cardiopulmonary system, which has impacted memory for everyone involved. Yay! So yeah, I have to do like ADHD, therapy. Yay!
That eventually the Moon Elves are what most folk of the realms consider to be the kind of standard elf, while the other elves are the sub-races. The Moon Elves, much like their ancestor Shalario, have a somewhat more outgoing, accepting and less xenophobic nature. Shalario travelled widely over Faerun, visiting many elven communities. Even so, it was 300 years before he travelled into the deep south with his
Let's
son
try that again.
Corneath. It was there that they were visited in the wilderness one night by the goddess Elestrei, who warned them of a dangerous race in the south, the powerful and evil Dark Elves of Elithir, and the Archmage who ruled the city of Atornash named Carnalis, who worshipped the evil god Veyrun. If you have watched my first 2 videos on the goddess Lolth, you will realise that Elestrei was acting in quite a self-interested way here, and perhaps this effort of hers to sway the meeting of the Moon and Dark Elves in order to keep them free from her brother's manipulations was going to have extreme consequences. To be fair, how was she to know what the future held? I should mention that it was the Gold and Silver Elves descended from the Eladrin who brought the worship of the Seldarine pantheon to Toril. So I guess from their perspective, the native Green Elves of Toril were kind of godless and mundane, tree huggers and worshippers of fey spirits. The Seldarine certainly influenced the affairs of elves, that's for sure. Shalario and his son Corneath travelled to Atornash and became guests of Carnalis, exchanging gifts and learning while there that the red dragon Mahatnatorian was soon to travel back to the north and lay waste to the elves there, particularly the Silver Elves, his own kin. So he set out to return to the north post-haste. Meanwhile, the dragon did indeed return, but the prince of the Gold Elves, Durothil, called out to the gods of Toril and Gonador, perhaps unknown to the Gold Elves and already worshipped by the Dark Elves, answered his call. Durothil saw that dragons were the masters of this new and strange world, and his plan was to forge an alliance between elf and dragon. So he made a pact with the red dragon. In exchange for Mahatnatorian murdering a silver dragon and stealing one of her eggs for Durothil to hatch and bond with as its master, he would hand over the silver elf, Shalario Moonflower, whom the dragon had a personal grudge with. This was likely to always involve some sort of bloodshed. I mean, he was dealing with an ancient red dragon, but many blamed this betrayal of Shalario more on the attitude of Durothil, who was...
That sounds dumb. Just saying that. Desperate times, desperate measures. But like, let me go. Any way that you do this, you're going to get something that's attached can be measured in tactical nuclear strikes. Yeah. No.
extremely arrogant and just expected Gonador to aid him. making demands like he was the god's equal. In exchange for that disrespect, Gonodor demanded a sacrifice of life from the refugees, and it was the Red Dragon who suggested it be the Silver Elf, not one of Durathil's Gold Elf subjects. Durathil agreed to this dark bargain, satisfying two problems with one solution, and promised that Shalario would be offered to the dragon after 2 decades, during which time the dragon was to leave the refugees in peace. The Silver Elf was completely unaware of this bargain, of course. He simply arrived back in the north to the amazing news that Durathil had not only driven off the dragon single-handed, but he had also acquired a silver dragon egg in the process. The silver dragon hatchling was named Silvery Wing, and Durathil kept her in a magical pocket dimension. Both Prince Durathil and Shalario Moonflower educated the young dragon on elven culture and battle tactics. The three grew quite close, and after 20 years, now large enough to fly with a rider, Silvery Wing was ready to leave captivity. The chosen date of her first time to fly in the outside world was the date when Durathil was to hand over Moonflower to Mahat Notorian. The unknowing Moon Elf was sent to the meeting place under the pretense to check the wind conditions for the Silver Dragon. When Mahat Notorian arrived suddenly and attacked, Durathil took to the air and fought the Red Dragon, unleashing powerful magic that did actually manage to drop Mahat Notorian from the sky, killing him from the impact with the ground. But Silvery Wing had also been fatally wounded, and she also plummeted to the ground. Durathil died on impact. Silvery Wing was already dead when they both hit, and so a sacrifice of elven life was made, and the demands of Gonodor were also satisfied. Durathil dying a hero in the eyes of his people. However, his plans of using Silverwing to form an alliance between elves and dragons also died with him and the poor Silverwing, who never stood a chance against Mahat Notorian and really wanted nothing more in life than to learn and experience beauty with her elven friends. Given that Silverwing was only 20 years old, I'm assuming some magical means within Durathil's magical dimension aided in her growth to a size capable of carrying the elven prince into the air. Still, hers is a very sad fate and a horrific crime in the eyes of dragons. Her mother murdered, her raised in captivity, brainwashed and sent to the slaughter. This, of course, was by no means the worst thing the elves had in store for the dragons. Unaware of what Durathil had really done, Shalario swore to the dying elven prince that he would train other elves to follow the example of the first dragon rider and bond with good dragons for the good of the elves, which is exactly what he did, becoming a dragon rider himself, and he went on to become the founder of the city of Shalarian, built around a keep where Durathil once lived. The keep became the home of many elven archmages, and in later years the city had a sizable force of dragon riders who lived and trained there. It was in the year minus 25,000 that the elven high mages gathered, only a century after Durathil's death, and created a mighty act of elven magic called a mythal. This one was a truly global enchantment that was linked to a passing comet known as the Kingkiller Star. The Draco Rage mythal encompassed roughly a 250,000 square mile area where the Kingkiller Star was visible over Faerun and caused all dragon and dragon-blooded creatures to slowly become more agitated and reckless, eventually becoming little more than raging beasts. This psychotic effect lasted for 10 to 60 days and caught the dragons completely unprepared.
Yeah, so that was basically like the reason why there's no more dragon cities in Faerun is because basically everyone got the rage virus, and everyone also had 9th level spells and a cone effect that can, melt steel beams. It did not work out well. All right. All right, so that thumbnail is now done. Sweet. Let's see here. Download. Let's see. Go to videos. All right, cool. Okay, so Funk, let's go here. And oh, properties. Yeah. Okay. Now, let's see. Yeah, that can go away. Go away. That can go away. That can go away. Go away. Now, let's get just do. Oh, go away. Okay. Let's get pull up that and pull you back.
Not even their war of genocide with the giants of Astoria had seen anything like this insidious magic. The only thing the dragons could do in later years was to flee the huge area of effect. But when it first occurred, they had no idea what was happening, and the results were absolutely devastating. The Dark Elves of Atilnash were right at ground zero of this effect. Their draconic masters and the many dragon-blooded among their population just went crazy, and the slaughter was unbelievably bad. From the perspectives of the Gold and Silver Elves, they had merely created a means to disrupt the wild population of dragons on their new planet, while they raised captive dragon hatchlings to become their elite mounted forces, simply moving them to pocket dimensions and other locations out of range of the Dracorage Mythos effects when the Kingkiller star came around again, easy enough to predict using the astrological lore of the Green Elves. But to the Dark Elves of Ilithir, this was a horrific disaster that came as an attack on their ancient civilization out of nowhere. Once Carnalis realized that it was the northern Gold and Silver Elves who had done this, well, it set a burning fire of revenge in the hearts of the Dark Elves, which has never been extinguished and motivated all of their antipathy and conflict which was to come. It soured their relations with the rest of the elven kind. In the north, the Gold Elves became known as Sun Elves, and they built a great city named Ossidian, where they recreated.
Yeah, yeah, that was an oopsie doodle. All right, I'm trying to remember. Okay, so no, that's not it. Fire as animation, compressed animation loop. No, you're the actual loop. Fire as animation. Let's see. Are you? Yeah, you're what I need. Okay, so we're gonna rename you first and foremost. Save as. Um, we'll go with Smug Eyes. Let's do that. Smug Eyes. Funk. Yeah, we don't need. So, complete layer. Uh, complete layer. We don't need that. Delete. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing we'll need to do is make a base set of squinty siding eyes. And see if I can. New layer. Uh, I'll just call it squinty sidey eyes. So there's that. And then we'll start working on that.
Created the best of their culture in its magnificent song and dance and artistic beauty, while the Moon Elves and their allies built the sister city of Sharlarian around Durathal's Keep, becoming a centre of trade and multicultural exchange that rivaled the ancient but now deeply wounded Atanash in its size and prosperity. Unknown to all, it was only about a century later that the attention of the goddess Lolth was drawn to the world of Toril, and one of her minions, the demon Haishkar, poured out of the spine of the world mountains with a massive overpopulation of orc warriors, their numbers out of control thanks to the lack of draconic super predators to keep them in check, along with many other factors. This orc horde laid waste to the majestic city of Obsidian and would probably have destroyed Sharlarian as well if not for them being forewarned of the attack thanks to the many magics that linked the two cities. Even so, it was a battle that cost the elves dearly, and they only managed to put down the orc invasion at great cost in elven lives. Once more the Sun Elves were faced with a threat that challenged their supremacy, and even as they picked up the pieces of their ruined city, they sent out scouts to find locations for new settlements. One group travelled to what is now known as the High Forest. Back then it was a forest known as Are Vandor. The Sun and Moon Elves spread their populations out across the north, the Sun Elves heading mainly west, the Moon Elves heading to the east and south. In the years of minus 23,600, the Moon Elves established settlements in the massive forest of Ardeep, which is where the area called the Greenfields is located these days. This period of time is what is known now as the First Flowering, a diaspora of the Sun and Moon Elves across the supercontinent, a time of many discoveries in their ancient history, a time of storybook glory as the dragon riders and powerful mages protected their new domains, driving back the monstrous and primitive races, including the now fading remnants of the ancient empire of the evil Yuan-Ti serpent folk. Far to the south, the Eleutheri Dark Elves witnessed the arrival of the fabulous Coatl from some distant land across the endless ocean. These feathered serpents were answering the call of the primordial god named Ubtao in the jungle lands which later became known as Chult. These Coatl put an end to the last bastion of Yuan-Ti power and kept under divine lock and key one of the most potent and ancient evils that exists on the world of Toril, the slumbering primordial terror, the night serpent Dendar. This war was not a one-sided fight. The Yuan-Ti proved to be formidable enemies with many potent magics of the older creator races that they held in secret. Eventually, they were driven from Chult over the Hazur Mountains into what is now the regions known as the Black and Mare jungles, which was a bit too close for comfort for the Dark Elves of Atanash, and during the centuries around minus 23,200 DR, the Dark Elves spread out from Atanash and established far-flung settlements further to the east and south, including the regions known as the Shah, as well as down south into the lands along the coast of the Great Sea of the South, including, very sadly, the many islands just offshore from what is now Halrua, Drambrath, Lurin, and Estegund. Once more, the Elves of the North were about to cause tremendous disaster and death for the Dark Elves, because this was when the Sundering happened. The mind-boggling thing about the ritual of high magic that is named Eversakatian in Elven is that this was planned carefully for hundreds of years before it began. There was a lot of consternation about this plan from scholars who had studied the ancient texts and the precise words of now long-lost prophecies. Those who knew of the reason the Gold and Silver Elves had left the Feywild warned of the disaster that befell Tintagir. But the Gold Elves stood firm and wanted to create their promised land at all costs. In accordance with their old prophecies, the land would be named Evermeet, and it would be a safe haven for all children of Corellin Larathian. The Elven High Mages built a granite tower in the middle of a ring of villages where the Elven Masons lived and worked. The tower was a thing of wonder, crafted of white granite that reflected the colours of the sky. It was taller than any tower built by elves before that date, and inside a stair climbed around the inside wall, each step with the name of a mage who would stand there during the entire course of the casting. Now, what many do not know is that this was not just the Sun and Moon Elves who cast this spell. It involved high mages of many different races who were invited based on their merit, not their race. The only exclusions were the Dark Elves and the Elutal Quasir, the aquatic elves, who were the last elven subrace to come to the world of Toril from the Feywild, sometime after minus 25,400 DR. All aquatic elves were once elves who lived on the land, so it seems there is, or was, some magic that allowed this permanent transformation into aquatic humanoids. When all the High Mages arrived, they waited for the exact moment when everything was ready. The stars and planets were in the right positions, and they began just before sunrise. The mages took their seats on the steps inside the tower and waited for the mage, a young green elf named Starleaf, to begin her song. Starleaf formed the centre of the ritual, and her place was in the middle of the tower. Each of the mages then joined their voices with hers in the song, and each summoned the magic of the weave and funneled it through their bodies and fueled it with their own life forces, ripping their souls from their bodies. Every single mage apart from Starleaf was killed in the act of creating the Sundering. Only Starleaf survived, and she felt the full extent of what they had done through her connection to all those threads of the weave. It was truly catastrophic. A lush and forested island suddenly appeared far out in the trackless sea, as though it had always been there. But it was somehow out of sync with the rest of the world of Toril. Its arrival displaced massive quantities of water and caused tremendous seismic waves. The coast of Faerun was simply destroyed by very severe...
Oh, we just put this big continent in the middle of the ocean. Who would know that it would not be like, something already there? Yeah. Select. Let's do the shrinkies. Let's do 4. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And now. Oh, yeah, that looks appropriately side-eye. Now I can do it kind of like there. Kind of like there. That'll work. Let's see here. Dunk. 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 None. Let's go back.
Severe earthquakes, huge tidal waves and floods that did not retreat as the risen level of the sea established a new coastline. Hundreds of elven settlements were destroyed. Thousands and thousands died. Geography, populations and cultures were changed forever. Another change was perhaps more dramatic as far as the future generations were concerned. The city of Atanash was utterly destroyed, and with it much of the first Elithir Empire. Thousands and thousands of Dark Elves died, and many island settlements off the far south coast of the Great Sea were just wiped away by tidal waves, and the islands were suddenly and permanently submerged under the sea. Included in the thousands of dead Dark Elves were almost all the worshippers of the god Faerun, leaving the remaining Dark Elves with Lolth as the dominant goddess, and her religion spread rapidly among the seriously traumatized survivors. It's hardly a shock that Lolth's influence and this horrific disaster further fanned the fire of hatred and implacable desires for revenge in the hearts of Dark Elves. For them, there could never be any peace with the northern races after what they had done. It was not just an act of war, it was an act of genocide. The disruption of the Sundering was much more severe than any truly knew, however, as it also permanently disrupted the magic of the weave around Toril, creating irregularities and non-uniformity, dead magic zones, and also areas of intense or wild magic. Also, the Sundering echoed both backwards and forwards in time, as the prime material plane had to adjust to one part of the outer plane suddenly merging permanently with the planet. In the year minus 31,000 DR, the Sundering created some sort of planetary shift in orbit. There are many ancient legends and myths about this, but what is known for sure is that a meteor smashed into the planet, and what was once 4 inland seas on the supercontinent became the merged sea of fallen stars. It was only after this occurred that the first true dragons appeared in the world. They may have evolved during this cataclysm from earlier proto-dragons, it's hard to be sure, and religious texts are hardly reliable archaeological records. Forward in time, and during the decade of the 1480s DR, the Second Sundering occurred. At the end of the Second Sundering, most of the dramatic geological disruptions of the event known as the Spell Plague were all but reversed. The sea levels went back to pre-Spell Plague levels. Strange effects like the floating earth motes ceased and the rocks crashed to the ground. Locations that had been transported to the sister world of Abir simply returned to where they once were, and a couple of new nations, Termanther and Akanul, were left where they were, along with the Dragonborn race. Halrua, Lantan, and Nimbrel returned to the realms, Lurin rose out of the sea once more, and while Unthor was also returned, it did so in a more diminished form than before. Many areas of climate change returned to how they once were before, including the desert sands of Anarok. And finally, Evermeet returned to the planet, now more anchored and more powerful than ever, touching on the prime material plane and the Feywild and the realm of Aravandor at the same time. Back in the aftermath of the first Sundering, the supercontinent was smashed and now looked as we find it to this day. And from this point in history, the elven population existed in a number of different nations, which were easier to identify clearly with the maps of the world as it still exists now. The movements and activities of the elven people of the north were fraught with drama and conflict due to the haughty, grasping and narcissistic Sun Elves mostly. There was a pivotal era known as the War of the Three Leaves, which saw the Dark Elven Eleutheri take covert action to avenge themselves on the Northern Elves, engineering feuds and warfare that spawned multi-front battles and kept the Northern Elves at each other's throats. In our next video on Elven history, we will enter the era known as the Crown Wars. In the meantime, please hit the like button for the sad memory of Silvery Wing the Dragon. Subscribe if you never knew that the Sundering was caused by high mages of lots of different races, and not just the high elves. Check out my Subscribestar or Patreon links for all the full scripts of this video, as well as some of the maps I crafted for it, and buy some Teespring merchandise to fund the many cups of coffee required to bring you this research. My friends, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.
So that didn't work. Let's do this. Select none. Let's build it that way. Hold up.
This recording may contain content unsuitable for children.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Dungeon Cast. I'm your host, Will.
And I'm your host, Brian.
This is the podcast where we talk about...
Yeah, let's not do that one just yet. Over here. Let's see. Let's do it like that. No, don't do that. Why do you do that? Oh, why do you do that? Don't do that. Thank you. Wrestle. Alright, that'll work. Let's see. Alright. Oop, oop. Okay, so this is AJ Pickett's discussion of the sorcerers, where they discuss why everyone keeps saying they're not. Why should they be charisma casters? And like they stated the reasons why they're charisma casters. Um, Oh, I believe this. TLDR, your charisma casters, because charisma doesn't matter about how you look. It's your self-confidence and your knowledge of self. So someone with a high charisma in Dungeons and Dragons have high self-esteem. They're able to fight off attacks on their souls and have a strong force of will and personality. No, that is not wisdom. And you channel your magic through that. If your force of will ever breaks, you explode. They forgot to mention that in 5th edition. The reason why sorcerers are so rare, supposedly in 5th edition, is because they die a lot.
Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full time thanks to your generous support, shares and views, with multiple uploads every week to help share the rich history of monsters, locations and mythologies of D&D. Sorcerers, those who, often through no fault of their own, are living conduits of magical power, are one of the most interesting classes in Dungeons & Dragons. At first glance they seem fairly straightforward. They have less of a range of different spells, but can cast them intuitively rather than spending years in grueling study on the precise mental disciplines needed to cast a spell. The sorcerer learns how to shape and control the magic that flows from them. Left unchecked, the magic would trigger an overload of emotions, which in turn would channel more and more magic, till they would simply internally immolate, like a burnt-out fuse, a circuit breaker that overloaded on raw magical current. Regardless of its origin, its source, these individuals face a road of self-discovery no less impressive than a wizard. With the intense development of intellectual ability of the wizard or of the cleric, with their intense awareness and understanding of the god's will and how to manifest it through the application of wisdom, the charisma of the sorcerer is less about being a flashy dresser and fast, smooth talker, though it certainly is about being more intimidating supernaturally with their ability that they manifest, but mostly it's about self-control, emotional mastery, and an ever-increasing deep understanding of themselves, their connection to some supernatural force, and the very shape and flow of magic itself. If I can use a handy metaphor, where magical energy is water, a cleric knows there is water filling the atmosphere, the rivers, the oceans, permeating things and constantly moving according to some grand system. They know that if they're in the right place at the right time with a gentle request to their gods, they can nudge the system and make it rain, or condense on a window, or appear in a morning mist. While the wizard knows that there is water everywhere, and with a complex application of dowsing rods, drills, hoses, pumps, and faucets calculations, they can draw it out precisely, direct it, and even keep it on hold or at bay until they're ready to release its flow. The sorcerer is a walking fire hydrant with a loose operating rod and a cap built of raw emotion. They feel the water constantly, like a pressure building up inside them, and the harder it pushes, the more emotionally strained they become. Once they let loose the flow of water, they can feel the jet and apply pressure to it intuitively, shaping and directing it with a subtlety that takes a wizard years to even begin to master. That is, in a nutshell, how I define and conceptualize the fundamental differences between these spellcasting classes. Though the origin of the powers, sorcerer's powers is varied. Some have a draconic heritage, some are cursed from birth, some have fey or otherworldly ancestry, some are just drifted or perhaps mutated, some are the result of exposure that has changed them in some supernatural way. Much like the other arcane classes, there is a load of options available to build exactly the sort of sorcerer you want, and there are a ton of articles and videos around to help you build the best sorcerer. I'm not entirely here for that though. I'm here to talk about the sorcerers in the D&D world, their lives, their attitudes, their lifestyle, their role and effect on the environment around them. Being a sorcerer is certainly a class you choose as a player, not something that is a choice for your character. And that is very important to the core experiences of these individuals. Being a sorcerer for them is not a choice. It is a gift and it's a burden. So Wikipedia has a pretty good summation of the sorcerer character class, and I quote, "The sorcerer class was introduced in 3rd edition as being separate from the wizard class, having more in common with contemporary fantasy fiction than the Vancian spell system, the Fire and Forget spell system. Sorcerers were introduced in the 3rd edition Player's Handbook and updated in the 3.5 edition Player's Handbook, and they've been with us ever since." So that's pretty interesting. The designers of the game were looking at a need for a class that stepped away from the Jack Vance-inspired Fire and Forget, have to relearn from a spellbook method, which we associate pretty firmly with wizards now. 3rd edition included included a lot of things that were optional additions in 2nd edition into the core rules, such as greatly expanding on the psionics and testing out all sorts of optional prestige classes. So that's kind of a tradition which is carried on in D&D to 5th edition, which brings us a mix and match character building fun right at the start of the game. So by about 6th level, you have a fairly well-developed character build. This is important because statistically not that many campaigns actually make it further than 10th level. At least this was the result of Wizards of the Coast's own research. Compared to Wizards, sorcerers instinctively grasp magic. They have more flexibility within the moment, but less versatility overall. That is, they don't need to prepare specific spells in advance, but each sorcerer also gains a much smaller number of spells, since they don't use spell books and can't simply copy new spells from other spell books or scrolls and such. So for them, learning new spells is a very intuitive psychic process. Conversely, they don't worry about carrying spellbooks and having them stolen. Thanks to the sorcerer's intuitive approach, they can cast more spells per day, but it takes them longer to acquire more powerful spells. So, they have magical powers. They are not arcane lore experts. They just feel the magic. They know how it works. And for them, they can cast from a raw personal reserve of power, and it's not as mentally taxing for them. However, they only really learn new and dramatic ways to use their magic when they go through a lot of life experience. Since sorcerers can only have a limited number of spells in their arsenal, most tend to specialize in the offensive magic that an adventurer will most likely use. While they gain only a few non-combat spells, they also perhaps have more sheer destructive force than any other character class. They're sometimes referred to as glass cannons. Their biggest strength is also their most fundamental disadvantage. Sorcerers lack the versatility of wizards, who can use any information on an adventure ahead to prepare spells from a wide range of options. The flexible sorcerer, however, can still choose which of his few spells to use or reuse next based on each new thing that he learns in advance, regardless of any predictions. So they can just react to the environment around them, much like a cleric could. Sorcerers and wizards often disagree. Wizards tend to think of sorcerers as sloppy and undisciplined, while sorcerers consider wizards obsessive and distant, so removed from the raw emotional effect of magic, the wonder of it. Kobolds, wild elves, chaos gnomes, a subrace of gnomes introduced in the Races of Stone supplement in 3rd edition. Diaboli are an obscure race of anarchists from the Mystara anarchists from the Mystara campaign setting, updated in Dragon Magazine 327, and Spellscale, which I keep meaning to get around to, a humanoid draconic race from the Races of...
That's what I meant before when he said he cites his sources. He just flat cites them.
Dragon supplement. All have sorcerer as their favoured class, and of course humans are quite often sorcerers. Sorcerers have always had access to metamagic feats and abilities that wizards only attain at later levels of advancement, and it really makes a huge difference to gameplay. It's a characteristic of their character class. Wizard player characters are mainly about having a spell for every occasion. Sorcerers are about using spells in creative and often unexpected ways, so they really reward a thoughtful and puzzle-solving sort of character play. I personally think that the sorcerer player characters are more rewarding for players who really like to get in-depth and creative with their special abilities. Plus, if they are in the mood to make a spellcaster who is just unbeatable in a certain type of spell use, such as a mastery of the infamous fireball, well, sorcery is your ticket. Also, I feel like this doesn't really get enough attention. This is an arcane caster who you can play with some interesting stats. Charisma, as I mentioned, is not just for charm, it's also pretty handy for intimidation. There's also no reason why you can't have a sorcerer who is a hulking, dim-witted brute. Fantasy stories are absolutely full of brawny thugs who hurl bolts of energy, and they usually have one major obsession: power, more power. It makes sense since the main thing that they have relied on and defined themselves with is power. So if power is good, more power must be better. This is a simple and fun playable character trope. They are adventuring for personal advancements. They don't have to have a high intelligence or wisdom to be a sorcerer. They can have a high strength, dexterity, and constitution, and be very handy with a quarterstaff or just their fists. And the main reason sorcerers don't have much interest in martial weapon proficiencies is that they are a living weapon. They just don't bother learning how to use armor because they much prefer to keep away from harm and just blast it before it gets near them. Also, one tends to learn how to use body armor in conjunction with learning how to use martial weapons the body armor is made to protect against. I'm not making any absolute statement there. It just seems like more common sense to me from my experience. You learn how to use armor when you learn how to use weapons. If you're doing it right, otherwise you're probably going to end up with a missing finger. There are always exceptions. The weapons sorcerers typically use are easily portable and easy to get hold of. They are weapons of convenience. So daggers, darts, slings, light crossbows, and quarterstaffs. They're just lying around. They get to choose 2 skill proficiencies from Arcana, Deception, Insight, Intimidation, Persuasion, and Religion. Characters don't have to be proficient in a skill in order to attempt any task of that type. In fact, it really doesn't make a hell of a lot of difference. Having proficiency in a skill means that you add your proficiency bonus to the ability checks you make with that given skill. If your character has a high attribute bonus, they will probably seem like trained individuals in all the skills related to that attribute to anyone who sees them in action. So they don't get too hung up on skill proficiencies and never say, oh, well, my character's not trained in it, so I won't even try. This is not the attitude which makes for heroic, stupendous, and legendary flukes or failures, the stuff that make good anecdotes for D&D. Sometimes, a lot of the time, you may fail in character, but win in the overall fun of the game. How many times do cool D&D stories start with, oh my god, my character failed so hard, the dice were just hating me, and everyone else leans in and says, yeah? What happened? Epic failure is just as much fun and makes for even better anecdotes than epic wins, but I digress. Sorcerers start with 4 cantrips. They always know 1 more cantrip than wizards do, which is a clear advantage in basic magic capability. This represents the fact that sorcerers has more of an intellectual feel, an instinctual feel for magic, so they have a slightly better basic range of spells that they can just fire from the hip, so to speak, as much as they like. Like wizards, they gain another at 4th and 10th level, but they're always ahead of the curve, what really sets them apart from wizards and other character classes is that they have to choose their sorcery origin right at 1st level. In the player's handbook, we have the Draconic Bloodline and the Wild Magic options. In our Unearthed Arcana releases, we have the Favored Soul, the Phoenix Soul, the Sea Sorcery, and the Stone Sorcery. Then after the playtest release, we got Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and from page 48 to 53, we have the officially approved Divine Soul, Shadow Magic, and Storm Sorcery. So at 1st level, you have the starting cantrips and know a couple of 1st level spells. Plus you have 2 spell slots and the benefits accorded to you by your specific sorceress origin. Let's take a look at those and see how they stack up at 1st level. So going into some detail, the Draconic Bloodline will provide you with fluency in Draconic language and an additional hit point and a natural armor class of 13 plus your dexterity modifier. So this is specializing in you're pretty tough for a sorcerer. They also gain an additional hit point each level that they go up in this Draconic heritage as well. Wild Magic provides Wild Magic Surge. Oh, I should point out that the Draconic natural armor class plus the dexterity modifier is not, you can add that onto armor and stuff.
So also, this is where he's getting into the 5th edition thing. Wild Magic was a 2nd edition thing. It was hair pulling. It was 2nd edition and 3rd edition as well. 2nd edition, it would literally just break the game sometimes. This is working out pretty well. Get that. Pull you up. And don't. Alright, so
Well, you know, you can benefit from wearing armor. It doesn't go away, your natural armor class, so it's never going to go below 13. Wild Magic provides Wild Magic Surge, really the key feature of this kind of sorcerer. So where you can, after casting a spell of 1st level or higher, on the DM say so, you roll a d20 and on a roll of a natural 1, you roll for a random wild magical effect on the table provided. These can be pretty disruptive and make a lot of Dungeon Masters justifiably nervous, which is why it is the DM that determines when this effect happens, not the player character. But also undeniably fun and can lead to some awesome D&D anecdotes. Also, At first level, the Wild Magic Sorcerer has access to Tide of Chaos, which allows them to gain advantage on one attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. They can use this once in between their long rests, except if the DM has declared a roll on the Wild Magic table after you've cast a spell of first level or higher. And note, the roll of a 1 on a d20 is not mentioned here, just the roll on the random table, after which the Tide of Chaos ability is recharged without needing a long rest. Favoured Soul has been replaced by Divine Soul with a few adjustments. They're basically the same anyway, so at first level you get the option to choose spells from the Cleric spell list. This includes the cantrips your sorcerer can cast. You can also choose. You also need to choose a particular affinity for your divine power source, and it doesn't have to be a nice one. This adds an additional clerical spell to the list of spells known, so an extra spell known at first level is pretty good. Also, you get favoured by the gods, so if you fail a saving throw or miss an attack roll, you can use this ability to add a roll of 2d4 to your total once between long rests, and that's pretty good. Phoenix Soul may not have done well enough in playtest, but is an interesting option, particularly for a player character that is a completely compulsive pyromaniac. At first level, you can simply touch a flammable object and set it on fire. They have Zippo fingers, something that movies love to show wizards doing, lighting a pipe with a flame from the fingertip. They also have a much more dangerous Mantle of Flame ability, where they basically turn into the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four. As a bonus action, they can ignite and wreathe themselves in fire for up to 1 minute, during which time they shed bright light out to 30 feet and dim light out to 60 feet. Anyone who lays a finger or a weapon on them within 5 feet takes fire damage equal to their charisma modifier. This bonus is also added on top of any other fire damage they do, so it's not much, but it's significant. They can do this once between long rests, but the sorcerer is not immune to fire damage, not even resistant to it. So I think part of the reason the sorcerer type did not catch on or ignite people's interest is because it basically makes no sense, much like the changes they made to the actual Phoenix later on. Sea sorcery likewise died in playtesting, though if you're running a sea-based campaign or have a pirate or aquatic non-player character with class levels, this is a great option. At first level, they have the ability to breathe underwater, and they have a natural swim speed equal to their walking speed, already pretty good. They also gain a power called the Curse of the Sea, which is a bit needlessly complicated, but goes like this. When you hit a creature with a cantrip attack, or a creature fails a saving throw against your cantrip, you can curse the target from the end of your next turn or until you curse a different creature with this feature. Once per turn, you can cast a spell. When you cast a spell, you can trigger the curse if that spell deals cold or lightning damage to the cursed target or forces it to move. Doing so subjects the target to an appropriate additional effect as outlined as follows. And then the curse ends if the spell isn't a cantrip, and you choose a different effect if more than one effect applies. So for cold damage, if the affected target takes cold damage from your spell, the target's speed is also reduced by 15 feet until the end of your next turn. If the spell already reduces the target's speed, you use whichever reduction is greater. For lightning damage, if the affected target takes lightning damage from your spell, the target takes additional lightning damage equal to your charisma modifier. For forced movement, if the target is moved by your spell, increase the distance it's moved by 15 feet. If any of this happens on a Tuesday of a non-deductible quarter that does not involve moving a cat from a sunny window ledge to a place replace it either with a book or a mirror or a flower pot, then the second target of every left-handed player at the table may have the advantage on their checks back to this ability description, because I assure you they will be making it damn near every time they make an attack roll. This is needlessly complicated, which some people are absolutely sure to love, but from my experience, I do not. Stone sorcery is about being a melee fighter, so they gain proficiency with shields, simple weapons, and martial weapons. Plus, the ability this build gives them access to specific spell lists that increase the option for spell selections. You don't get any extra spells, and these spells are orientated around melee combat and giving the sorcerer some magical smites and weapon buffs to make them extra murderous in close combat. So obviously, you need to get toughened up for this sort of build. Stone's durability increases their hit point by 1, and you get a bonus to their armor class by spending an action, and to avoid any complication they avoid saying the sorcerer is casting a spell called Stone Skin. This increases the sorcerer's armor class to 13 plus their constitution modifier. So it can go quite high. So say if you've got a constitution of 20. If they are not wearing any armor, but they may also use a shield. Obviously, a magical shield will be very high on the priority list of loot for this adventuring character, and woe betide any DM who denies it to them. Their skin retains this rocky effect until the player ends it as a bonus action, or the character is incapacitated, or if they put on some armor. At no point is this called a spell or a magical effect, so it can't be technically dispelled unless, I don't know, you sneak up and put a helmet on them and it just negates the effect because they're wearing armor now. Sorcerers have 1d6 plus constitution modifier hit points per level, so obviously you want to max out your constitution on this character. I am sure the fighter will laugh at the bloody puddle you're reduced to, but the party healer will not appreciate the extra work and drain on their spell slots constantly healing you from rushing into combat. I like to think of this as the sorcerer version of an Eldritch Knight. Not a shocker that people seem to prefer the Eldritch Knight and not getting killed all the time. So this build didn't really survive playtesting. Next, we have the new options from Xanathar's aside from the Divine Soul, which I already covered. First is the Shadow Magic Sorcerer. They start with 120 foot in dark vision and have the Strength of the Grave. When reduced to 0 hit points, they make a Charisma saving throw, and the difficulty class is 5 plus the amount of damage taken from that specific attack or effect that reduced them to 0. So that's quite important. If they roll over that DC, they are instead reduced to 1 hit point. The exceptions are if this damage is caused by radiant energy or it was a critical hit. Also, they cannot use this ability again until they have a long rest, but it's very cool. Really evokes that classic move by The Undertaker, the professional wrestler, where he gets slammed, appears out for the count, and then just sits up. Fantastic for theatrics, but yeah, the Shadow Sorcerer totally does that. Finally, the Storm Sorcerer, another great option for a campaign on the sea, also great for spell jamming, or for those who want to emulate Lord Raiden or Thor. At first level, they are fluent in Primordial and can also speak and understand Aquan, Ignan, Terran, and Auran. So quite an arsenal of otherworldly languages there, which is very handy for travel between the planes, particularly the inner planes. They also have the ability before or after casting any spell of first level or higher, so not cantrips, of spending a bonus action to whip up a mini whirlwind and fly up to 10 feet without invoking any opportunity attacks. That's very handy. At second level, all sorcerers gain access to the Font of Magic ability, and the first thing that happens is they gain sorcery points. And even before they start to use meta magic powers, you can already start spending your sorcery points to create additional spell slots. Sorcery points are super easy to work out. You have the same number of them as your sorcerer level. So level 7, 7 sorcery points. It's slightly more complicated when spending sorcery points to buy additional spell slots, but there's a chart and a simple rule to remember. It costs 1 spell point more than the spell slot level for first and second level spells. Then we skip we skip to 4 sorcery points for third level spells, and it costs 2 more sorcery points than the...
So for people that aren't aware, 4th edition did not get received very well, even though it does have some actually good things. It tends to be sort of World of Warcrafty, and everybody kind of just plays the same thing with different skins. However, a lot of the problems that we have in 5th edition, they answered in 4th edition, but yeah, it was not received well. Delete layer. Click convert. Float. Click. Move you down a little bit. Then we go here. Convert. Float. Go here. Do this. Cough. Layer. Good lord. I know the post-nasal drip is bad, but God. So get rid of that.
The spell slot level, and we only have 5 editions of D&D, so we can only purchase spell slots up to level 5. Easy to remember. Before we talk about the higher level supernatural powers granted to the different sorcerer types, the other most important aspect that separates the sorcerer from the wizard is meta magic. This kicks in at 3rd level, and each sorcerer chooses 2 options with an additional meta magic option choice at level 10 and level 17. The meta magic options available in the player's handbook are Careful Spell, which allows the sorcerer to selectively avoid a number of targets in a spell's area of effect based on their charisma modifier. Distance Spell, which has 2 versions. One extends the range of a touch effect spell to a 30-foot range spell instead, and the other simply doubles the range of any spell with a range of at least 5 feet. Empowered Spell, which allows the re-rolling of damage dice on a spell up to the charisma modifier in total number of dice rolled, which is not that great since the new result could actually be the same or lower damage than it was before. However, this is one of the few meta magic options that can be stacked with other meta magic options on the same spell, something that's normally forbidden. In fact, I think it's the only one that can be stacked. Extended Spell, which allows any spell with a duration of a minute or more to have its total duration doubled, up to a maximum of 24 hours. Heightened Spell, which costs 3 sorcery points, but allows the sorcerer to force a target to make their saving throw against the spell with disadvantage, which is very handy. Quickened Spell, which allows the sorcerer to spend 2 sorcery points to reduce the casting time of 1 action down to 1 bonus action instead. Subtle Spell, which costs 1 point and removes any verbal or somatic component of the spellcasting. Does anyone, just a side note, does anyone actually use the word somatic outside of D&D? Gestures is a perfectly adequate and well understood word for body movements as well. I don't see why we don't just switch to that. Maybe in 6th edition. Finally, Twinned Spell, which is the most complicated at first glance, but which allows the sorcerer to by spending sorcery points equal to the spell's level, with a minimum of 1 for a cantrip or first level spell, and for spells that target only 1 creature at range. This basically doubles the effect, and 2 targets get hit, hopefully with a single casting of the spell. So it's pricey, but it's powerful. At higher levels, aside from more sorcery points, spell slots, and a great number of spells known, each of the sorcerer types gets additional superpowers at levels 6, 14, and 18, along with the ability score improvements or feats if you take that option. And at level 20, they have the ability to regain 4 sorcery points after every short rest. Now, I won't go into great detail with the specific supernatural powers gained by each sorcerer's origin, but the draconic bloodline types get wings, the wild magic type get more control over their strength and severity of their chaotic spells and of their luck. The divine soul gets more or less turned into an angel. The shadow magic types get to turn into shadows and summon shadow hounds. The storm sorcerer can control the weather and unleash lightning bolts. Combined with the fine control over their spells, sorcerers are very much like the superheroes and villains of the D&D world. They're the mutants, the altered, the meta-humans, or meta-other playable races. They might be the end result of an alchemical or supernatural experimentation. They may have been changed by exposure to otherworldly forces. Their origin could be extremely diverse and unique. They may be heavily influenced by the way people around them react to their emergence of their or evidence of their supernatural powers, particularly if they were shunned or persecuted, particularly if they've got some sort of weird appearance, like one ear is bigger than the other, or they've got a third eye, or tentacle skin, or something like that. Sorcerers may have manifested their unusual abilities from birth.
Tentacle skin. But yeah, the mutant thing is a perfect example. The difference between, if you look at Scarlet Witch in the comics, depending on most of the comics run, versus Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange had to learn various things. Scarlet Witch, most of her powers were these hex bolts and various hexes that she kind of threw, and she just kind of went with it. She didn't actually really until later, she didn't actually really do spell stuff. Those are a perfect example of wizard versus sorcerer. Also, the simple fact that if Scarlet Witch doesn't ride hard on her powers, tends to explode. Burns herself from the inside out. Do not take this and you use the Marvel movies as an example. I'm referring to comic books that like predate probably the age of most people who would possibly watch this video, including myself. Layer, anchor layer, eyebrows, select, invert, float. All right. Dang. Okay. File. Save. Oh. Save a copy. Compressed for animation. Look. Save. No. We'll close that one. Now let's go back to this.
Some may have accidentally unleashed their sorceress potential later in life. It's really up to the DM and the player to figure this out for each new sorceress player.
Actually, one second. One second. What do I do with this? I'll be back. I'm fine. Everything's fine. I did not smack my head on the door when I was walking in. All right, look.
Character, or of course for the DM to figure out for the NPCs with sorceress abilities. So there are an incredibly diverse, different range of superpowered individuals that you can have in your game. They're magical individuals, magical creatures. Certainly one of the most fun character classes to play, and I'm a long-time fan of superheroes role-playing games, so the sorcerer is right up my alley. And even though they don't have a range of spells known as broad as the wizards, they often have 3 ways to use every different spell that they know. So Have fun figuring out what is just the best sort of combination effects you can achieve with your sorcerer, and let me know any particularly effective combinations down in the comment section below. Just a reminder, if you've not subscribed already, feel free to do so, and be sure to hit that notification bell as I upload from the other side of the world sometime in your future. For access to all the scripts and 1 week advance access to some of these videos, consider becoming a patron on the channel on Patreon for a minimum of just $1 per month. Join the community on our Discord server, come say hi, maybe join in a game. Also, if you want to pick up a new...
Alright, so we're going to switch the episode for a hot second. Whoop. Let's see here. Bonk. Yeah, that works. Bonk. No, don't do that. Do this. Right here. Oh yeah, I just opened up a playlist this time. That was not what I wanted to grab. Bonk. Bonk. Alright. No, why do you do that? Stop it. Every time I drag one of the things to the other monitor, it's like, do you want to make it the full thing? No. Bonk. And do this. Now.
Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. Well, of course, I have to talk about the negative material planes. After our lovely exploration of the dazzling, radiant, and often beautiful positive material planes, this is going to be quite a contrast. So fortify your vital spark, O brief and fragile mortal creature, as we head into the eternal hunger of darkness. While the positive energy plane is very dangerous to mortal creatures, it has nothing on the negative material plane. Even with strong magical protection, to venture here as a mortal creature is extremely unwise and should never ever be done without a very good plan to get back out again. And Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes tells us why in the entry for the dreaded Nightwalker. The moment a living being crosses over into the negative plane, a Nightwalker steps from the negative plane into the prime material plane, and it only has one thing on its to-do list, which is destroy all life. Meanwhile, the traveller who's crossed over to the...
As I recall, the Nightwalker is from the Epic Level Handbook. If you don't know what the Epic Level Handbook is, and you play 5th edition, you're too low level to play. I mean that literally. 5th edition caps out before they start. You're going to get wrecked.
Negative plane found it easy enough, but now in order to get back out again, they have to convince the Nightwalker to go back into the negative plane again. If the Nightwalker is destroyed or no means is found to trick, trap or lure it back into the negative plane, the traveller is stuck there forever, or at least for as long as they can last. The barrier that prevents exit simply eats any energy or effort directed at it. The more one tries to force their way out, the harder it resists, and such struggles, like the desperate fly caught in the web, will certainly draw the attention of something truly horrific. I'll talk some more about the Nightwalkers in a while, but first, I was asked recently by a viewer how a plane that is infinite, like the prime material, positive, negative, bitopia and others, can have a border with another plane. And I found the best answer is not that it's not a physical border, like other planes all exist in the same space. They're just at different frequencies, much like the radio stations all are around us all the time, but we have to tune the antenna or turning the dial increases or decreases the length of a spool of wire attached to the external antenna. This eventually matches the exact...
Another thing that's also in campaign setting, the reason why plane shift requires a fork is because each of the planes is at a certain harmonic wavelength, like the scales of music. Yeah.
Wavelength of radio frequency you want, and the signal of electrical impulses the antenna resonates with is amplified to make the sounds we hear. For those of you who never wondered how a radio works, there you go. The cosmic planes, these alternate dimensional frequencies are not accessible to us in reality, I mean. They are indications of, there are indications in cosmic physics that we exist in a multiverse, but in Dungeons and Dragons, these are high frequency upper planes and low frequency lower planes, and the lowest frequency of them all is the negative material plane. As powerful as the positive plane is, the negative plane is equally destructive. If one raises their frequency to escape, the plane simply absorbs and dissipates the very mystical energy employed to do this. Of course, in D&D, we have negative energy, essentially a reverse spectrum of energy that makes no sense to the physics of our real world. But in D&D, this is no problem beaming out of the negative plane, and creatures can travel from there if they're undead, particularly the incorporeal variety. Any solid matter is more difficult to take from the plane, and it tends to simply disintegrate matter, sucking the energy out of it until it can no longer bind together in the form of mass itself. So, as you can imagine, the negative plane is utterly dark, cold, has no atmosphere. It's mostly void. However, there is a caveat to this, that the negative energy can actually make negative matter itself. There can be swirling nebulas of dust and the slowly eroding stark rocks that may once have been planets. These will be swarming with entities of pure negative energy, billions of them, teeming, silently screaming, both drawn inextricably to and eternally tormented by the psychic screams of things trapped in darkness forever. Very few of them ever escape, but when a necromancer casts a spell to animate a skeleton, one of these entities is siphoned off and bound to a suit of bones. From its perspective, the prime material world is a searing barrage of sensations and sudden mental silence.
So this is why in the lore for Dungeons and Dragons, that even though you're animating a skeleton, it's always considered an evil act, because the next little bit is where he describes the absolute torture that being brought to our plane of existence that these entities are. At all times, you're basically taking a blowtorch to some random entity that didn't do anything to you, and are just frying it with the blowtorch and occasionally giving it some form of balm to lessen the pain a little bit, so they'll do what you ask. There's no way in hell that cannot be considered a violent and selfish act.
It may be that the skeleton will grip a living person's head and gouge their eyes out just to hear the mental shriek before they die. As the soul leaves the body, the skeleton sees a tiny glimmer of the ethereal plane, and the way it should have gone, the only pathway to peace, one that it will never be able to travel. So it's full of rage. When a cleric calls on divine power to rebuke and turn the undead, it is a blazing inferno and high-intensity sound that blasts out at them. The weaker spirits simply destabilize and lose any anchor to the prime material plane, being destroyed, sucked immediately back to the endless void. The stronger their anchor, the better they are able to resist this effect, but the urge to flee is very strong, even in the most powerful of them. What is really horrible about this is that one can kind of understand why the undead kill relentlessly. Which is certainly evil, yes, but they're driven by mental trauma we can barely imagine. The entry of a mortal being into the negative plane is a blazing beacon of light to the undead entities, but they're not as motivated to extinguish it, oddly enough, as if they were on the prime material, since it won't bring them any peace in the negative material plane. They may gather just to look at something because it's different, and there lies the danger. Mortal creatures don't understand that they are like a walking lantern of vital energy, heat and clear thought to the undead. But some entities, some powerful entities, gain more power and some measure of peace by exploiting and controlling other undead entities. An immortal being can be used to lure and then trap the weaker spirits. What form these things take is pretty random, but they're all really, really horrific, like enormous spider things with 1,000 faces and no eyes, or tentacles like rotting tongues reaching out of spheres of vile, floating fluids. Everything eats you here. Everything is draining and predatory. Everything is tormented and insane. If you die here, you join them. There is no escape, even in death. Well, there are some ways. And there are certainly artifacts here that were placed in the negative plane by other powers, such as prisons holding incredibly powerful primordials, the demiplane realms which exist in cosmic ways as kind of garbage chutes of powerful beings. They just dispose of stuff here. The rare incursions of elemental or prime material matter that can be sucked in via some gateway spell, and of course the chance encounters with creatures from the far realm who are so outlandishly alien that they can exist even in the negative material plane. So in a nutshell, getting randomly dropped into this plane without any protection is a bit of a race to see what kills you your character the first. Will they die from the relentless hit point drain, doing 2d6 damage per round? Will they die from the DC 25 Constitution saving throw versus cumulative levels of exhaustion? Or will they die from the total lack of air? The vacuum's interesting. Ignoring the hit point drain and exhaustion for a moment, if a character doesn't hold their breath, which will cause their lungs to explode, and exhales all the air from their lungs, they will lose consciousness in about 15 seconds, and perhaps survive up to 2 minutes, even a total vacuum. As the character begins to pass out, the last sensation, aside from pain and horror obviously, is that the liquid on their tongue and eyeballs begins to bubble as it boils in the zero pressure. The skin and tissue underneath begin to swell as liquid starts to vaporize, but the body doesn't actually explode. That's just a Hollywood thing. Despite the extreme cold temperatures, heat does not leave the body quickly enough for the character to freeze before they suffocate. Again, it's another Hollywood trope. Due to the lack of convection and conduction, as there's no living microbes, they won't decompose in the normal way. Instead, the tissue is simply eroded away by the matter-destroying effect of the plane itself. So the body will slowly turn to ash. How slowly is fairly random. It could be minutes, it could be years. It depends on the strength of the negative energy in your immediate area, and we'll talk about that in a second. If you do have adequate protection from the negative material plane and its inhabitants, then there are places to go and things to see. Well, if you have really good dark vision. The creatures known as the Zagyi Enegons live here. They're the exact opposite of the Zagyar found in the positive plane. There's also the Trillocs, creatures of pure negative energy, who are very rarely found in other planes but are much more common here. And it's rumoured that they actually came from another plane of existence and have now established themselves at home in the negative plane. They're composed of negative energy and they feed on it, death. There's also intelligent undead. Vampires, liches, wraiths, wights, and spectres make this plane their home base. There is no weather in the realm, of course, but there is variability, just as there are areas where the negative energy seems to recede and create these so-called doldrums. All
right. So, let's see. We can do properties. All right. That is the 3 things that I wanted to get done. Cool. With that, hope you know, if you watched along or listened, chat was not very active. Therefore, if you're watching this in VOD, hello. But if you watched along and listened and found that interesting, or are currently asleep, hello, wake up. That was again AJ Pickett. He's one of the podcasts that I have on normally when I'm working on stuff for my D&D game. So, you can find him either the Mighty Gluestick or AJ Pickett. Both of those return on YouTube. Pretty much anything you ever need to know about D&D, he has probably a video for it. Worked on 3 bits of artwork. And with that, good fight, good night. I'm going to go probably make dinner. So with that, again, thanks for coming. And as always,
Do it. Clicky, clicky.